Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Black. I'm from Silverman, Acampora in New York. It's a great pleasure to be here and to participate. Thank you for inviting us. Considering what's going on in the United States, thank you for inviting anyone from the United States to come here these days. We're very, very grateful. I wanted to talk a little bit about cybersecurity issues from a U.S. perspective. What are we thinking about it in the United States? Well, for starters, many of our companies have been severely impacted. One thing I would say about the American culture is when it starts to affect us more, we start to pay more attention, for good or for bad. It's still that whole ocean thing. We don't quite understand that things from all over the world will affect the United States. One thing I will say about cyber criminals is they are, as we say, equal opportunity attackers. Some of I'm sure you recognize Chase as one of the world's largest banks. Target and TJ Maxx are what we would call the United States middle market stores. They're not high-end like Neiman Marcus, but they're very popular among middle-class consumers. Anthem is one of our largest healthcare organizations. Yahoo, I'm sure you're all familiar with. And, of course, Equifax is a company that records your credit and records credit for companies. That just came out, and I don't know how many of your parliaments work, but we record and have on television all of our hearings from our U.S. Congress. So everyone's been watching members of the House of Representatives beat up on the executives of Equifax of how could you let this happen? My firm works closely with a cybersecurity firm of experts, and I actually asked them that question is, how is it that people don't know when they are being attacked by cybersecurity? And one of the experts said something very interesting. He said, how would you know? The access comes in just like any other access. It looks perfectly harmless. They have masked themselves. And the real issue, which confuses many people who don't quite understand how it works, is the companies are only finding out 2 and 3 years later that this happened. And as we are in the United States are starting to look more seriously at things like GDPR as it's about to come into effect here in Europe, and I as a lawyer who practice in this area keep trying to remind my American colleagues and my American clients, you will be governed in many ways by GDPR. If you sell into the EU, if you are profiling EU citizens, these rules are going to apply to you. And then when I mention the fines, I get their attention because they're so high. Oh, and by the way, the last company up there, Home Depot, is we have a term in the United States, DIY, do it yourself. You can go in there and buy all of the supplies you need to build whatever you need for your home. U.S. privacy really does sit very closely with cybersecurity. I also teach a course on this at a local law school, and I explain to my students that my European colleagues very politely call us medieval when we talk where the U.S. is when it comes to the concept of privacy. We don't have anything close to what any of you have as far as a general privacy regime. There are certain rules involving things like if you trade securities, that little area of your business is protected. We have something called the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, that has a very narrow rule if you have people's health information. Graham Leach talks about if you have a very narrow area of banking information. But that's about it. And they don't interconnect, and they don't intertwine in any way, and they each have their own set of rules and protections and consumer rights. And that's really all we have on our national federal level. So as you can see, we are far behind you. And it's things like that that create the holes and create the opportunities for cyber hackers in many ways, because we don't have this overall concern and thought about privacy. Now, one of the reasons for that is if any of you read anything about U.S. politics, sadly, for the last 10 years plus, our national government hasn't been able to pass very much legislation about anything, unfortunately. And they can't get a consensus on privacy. So what's happened is our states have done that. Many of our states, New York, California, and Massachusetts, are three of the leaders, have state laws that in many ways reflect and look a lot like the EU privacy rules and regimes. They have an overarching rule that a consumer's data privacy is protected, and a consumer's individual information is protected regardless of whether it's their health information or their banking information. So they are actually getting far ahead of our national government and trying to reflect what you all do here in the European Union. So who are these hackers in the U.S.? There is a U.S. Stereotype of hackers that has been romanticized by Hollywood of this 20-something millennial who's brilliant, who sits in their parents' basement. You know, they don't know how to make their bed, they don't know how to do their laundry, but they can certainly crack any code. That's a very romantic view. It's also, unfortunately, a popular view that needs to be done away with, because that is not who these hackers are, and we all know that now. Why do they do this? Again, the romanticized view of the U.S. hacker is he's this libertarian, anarchistic person who wants to disrupt and do it for fun. That's clearly no longer the case. They're doing it for individual monetary gain. Organized crime is actually catching up, and they are using hackers within their own organized crime to be able to disrupt organizations in order to control their members. They want to show how powerful they are. There is this fraternity and sorority among hackers that they want to show what they can do, and it's a terrible English term. It's called street cred, short for credentials, showing, you know, well, I breached the Department of Defense last week. Well, I breached the Homeland Security last week. Well, I hacked the president last week. Maybe that's who's putting his tweets out. I don't know. One would hope. But in any event, so that's another reason. The political activism. I will speak a little bit about the U.S. election at the end. But again, these hackers, the millennials who've got involved in politics, will want to go up, and if you open up your favorite candidate's website, you might open up something very embarrassing, or an embarrassing picture or a bizarre GIF of them showing. And again, it's, you know, we went in and we disrupted you. Because now that campaign, instead of what it needs to do, run its campaign, is trying to figure out how to undo that GIF and stop this embarrassment when you go there. And I'm sure you all are aware of this. On Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, you have not only the real individuals, but you have all of these fake accounts that, at a minimum, sometimes you can't tell, but on the other end, they're parody accounts. So you will open up a parody account of just about any important public official. Our president certainly has enough of them right now. He gives us enough things to make fun of. And of course, there's obtaining secrets for foreign military. We all know about WikiLeaks. I'm sure most of you have heard of Edward Snowden, who, again, typical of sort of a U.S. thought, his activities have now been romanticized by Hollywood. He's looked upon, he is either looked upon as a traitor, or he's looked upon as a folk hero in the United States. Because some people have said, well, you know, there needed to be this great transparency. That, by the way, is also, it's sort of, I think, in the American mindset, why there is this issue about protecting privacy. We still too much do have this Wild West type of a mentality of rugged individualism, and everybody should be free, and everything should be open, and everything should be transparent. So why are we hiding anything? You know, if you're hiding something, it's got to be bad. No, we're protecting it because you don't get to know what medication I'm on. But they don't. But again, that ethological mindset has not truly caught up, which is another reason why we don't have these rules. I mean, you talk to certain members of Congress, and our Congress, there used to be what we called in U.S. politics the governing middle, where you had your folks on one end or the other, but you had enough people in the Congress and the state legislatures that you governed from the middle and things got done. I followed politics the last 20, 30, 40 years probably, even when I was in college, and that middle has disappeared. So it's getting much more difficult for anyone to come together on any of these decisions, and you do have members of the U.S. Congress who think all of this, like they think climate change is silly. They think all of this is silly. So you can't get that ground to get anything done. That said, not all hackers are evil. We do have what we call white hats, and those are folks who are in the cybersecurity business. Those are folks who sometimes either professionally or as a hobby will go in and they'll notify a government agency. I just found this vulnerability. You might want to plug that hole. Or I just found this issue. You might want to do something about that. And they are as smart as the black hat hackers, and they're trying to get ahead of them. One thing that Francisco mentioned that I wanted to pick up on about the shortage of people who want to do this. This summer, thank you. Last summer, I was able to attend the Federal Bureau of Investigations, had a meeting with compliance officers, and the young lady got up who ran it and said, please, could you get young people to come to work for us? Nobody wants to work for the government. They all want to work for Google, and they all want to work for Yahoo. So we're not getting any of the right people to come in and help us. Let me just run ahead. I'm running out of time here. How do they get in? Again, desktops, thumb drives, mobile phones, customer and vendor sites. Let me speak about that for a moment. Companies are getting smarter and protecting themselves, and they're building these very good firewalls, but the hackers are finding those who aren't are the accounting firms and the law firms, and they are putting worms in through those entities and using that to get into our clients. So we're all going to start hearing our customers and our clients saying, well, before I engage you, tell me about your cybersecurity. Tell me about how strong your website is. Tell me how strong your firewalls are, because that's how the hackers have gotten smarter. They know they can't breach the company anymore, so they're going to the weakest link, which unfortunately they're finding out of the lawyers and the accountants. Again, also, this one moment on Wi-Fi, it's been discovered WPA2, which if any of you look on your mobile phones, that will tell you that is the encryption that's being used in your mobile phones. It's been hacked. It's been broken in. So the entire Wi-Fi is now open to hacking because the encryption is not strong enough anymore. How bad is it getting in the United States? In 2016, there were almost 1 billion malware detections from almost 1 million consumer and corporate portable devices. I mean, those numbers are staggering in over 200 countries. Ransomware. Again, the U.S. notices something when it starts to affect them. And just like your wife's pictures, it's happening more and more and more. Except it's not their pictures. It's their customers' data. It's their medical data, and so forth. And why is it so easy? I looked into this, and for just $39 US, you can go onto the dark web and buy ransomware as a service solution. It is now becoming its own industry. So for $39 and no knowledge of how to do coding, you can go on the dark web and start your own ransomware business. And one thing about these hackers, they're entrepreneurial. The newest thing we've heard about are what they call watering hole attacks, where a predator will lurk around and looking for someone. This happened to a client of a friend of mine. Someone who was working the overnight shift was hungry, and he went on to the local pizza parlor to check out their menu. That menu had been hacked, and it was sitting there as for prey. So even the pizza parlor certainly didn't know it. They were a small little 2 or 3 person business. They had no idea. But because they were near this large company, the hacker went onto their website without surely the pizza parlor's notice and knowing, and sat and waited. And when this gentleman decided to go on because he was hungry on the overnight shift to buy himself a pizza for local delivery, they hacked in through that menu. and they shut down it was a healthcare company, and they shut down their whole system for 2 days. The hackers are coming after U.S. manufacturing because if they can cut down a key factory, it can certainly cause tremendous damage to our infrastructure. I'll skip that because I'm running out of time. How are American corporations reacting? Well, the good news is 78% of all public companies have reported an increase in cybersecurity investment. The problem is only 25% are willing to voluntarily share their data stories and their hacking stories. It's silly, but it's a sense of embarrassment. They're afraid to admit it, so they quietly fix it. They don't tell anybody. And if the companies could work together and share the data, a lot of these hackers do the same thing over and over to the same people, and they could actually help to work together collaboratively to fight these hackers, but they're afraid to. So you can see the tremendous diversity in that. I couldn't talk about cybersecurity as an American if we didn't talk briefly about our election. We don't know exactly what happened, to be perfectly honest, but we do have some facts. I'm wrapping up, I'm sorry. What we do know is that the Russians did use Facebook. They spent a lot of time finding these trolls, and they would put up Facebook pages, Instagram pages, and basically they had, the troll farms had full-time people trying to put up things that would divide America. You mentioned some of the key issues there that would divide the United States. They even put up fake groups as they were activists and got several hundred people to start showing up at rallies, thinking they were there as part of the American political process. They were unknowing agents of the Russian government. What can we do better? Well, one, we could certainly adopt something like the GDPR. The U.S. needs to get its act together in privacy, and I think that will help in cybersecurity. We can federalize our state protections. We can expand our current laws, federal laws, to work together. The Wassenaar arrangement is now working on attempting to expand cybersecurity. Perhaps if we could, as the U.S., join in that, we haven't yet, and work on that. And also arguably have more criminal and civil penalty rules. There aren't enough criminal laws out there to really force these hackers to bay, unfortunately. And once the laws and the regulations catch up to what they're doing, that could also put some real teeth into it and stop them and at least scare them off. Final thoughts: we are becoming more aware. We're catching up with you, and hopefully at some point we'll be at the point you are, where we'll be able to work together to help with protecting privacy and fighting cyber attacks. Again, thank you very much for your time.